In Australia, workers face a range of urgent challenges, including rising unemployment, punishing attitudes towards the poor, and stagnant wages and benefits. Despite the historical role of unions in protecting workers' rights, union action has been increasingly restricted, leaving workers to rely on ineffective parliamentary processes. In response, workers must take matters into their own hands, developing an independent working class agenda and forming alliances to fight for their rights. This video will explore the issues facing workers in Australia today and discuss building a broad-based, independent working class movement that prioritizes the needs of the people over the exploitative capitalist economy. One of the significant issues faced by workers in Australia today is the rise of precarious work, which has disguised unemployment and contributed to increasing job insecurity. The term precarious work refers to temporary, casual, and contract employment, where workers lack job security, benefits, and stability. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, approximately 30% of workers in Australia have insecure work arrangements, and this trend is on the rise. This issue affects young people, women, and migrant workers in particular, who are more likely to experience precarious work and its associated problems. The problem with precarious work is that it disguises the real unemployment rate, making it difficult to track and address. Workers in precarious jobs are often unable to access benefits like sick leave, annual leave, or job security, leading to increased stress and financial insecurity. Additionally, the lack of benefits and stability makes it challenging for workers to plan for their futures, leading to a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness. Furthermore, the rise of precarious work has been accompanied by a culture of punishing the poor. Workers in low-paying jobs are stigmatized and blamed for their circumstances, despite the fact that they often have no control over their employment conditions. This culture of blame further exacerbates the problems associated with precarious work, as it leads to a lack of support for those who need it most. To address this issue, workers must come together and demand secure and stable jobs with decent pay and conditions. Unions must be empowered to protect the rights of workers, and policies must be put in place to ensure that all workers have access to secure and decent employment. Unions are both necessary and very limited. The top officialdom of unions are unlikely to enter into any struggle beyond those allowed by legislation that protects big business exploitation and profiteering. Those unions with the large asset base, property, and investment portfolios are more reluctant to take any action that may risk their financial arrangements. It must be our objective that unions and community groups have an independent capacity to act in their members' interests, regardless of which party holds office in Parliament. The agenda must serve the needs of the people, not an electoral cycle. Another issue is the prevalent culture of punishing the poor, which exacerbates the difficulties faced by the most vulnerable members of our society. We argue that this culture is perpetuated by politicians and the media, who consistently demonize and blame the poor for their own misfortunes, while turning a blind eye to the systemic economic and social factors that contribute to poverty. This culture of blame and punishment is particularly evident in the welfare system, where punitive measures such as income management and work for the dole schemes are imposed on recipients despite evidence that they are ineffective and even harmful. This approach is not only morally unjust but also counterproductive, as it perpetuates poverty rather than addressing its underlying causes. To address this issue, we propose a shift in focus from punishing the poor to providing support and assistance to those who need it most. This could include implementing policies such as a living wage, adequate social security payments, and affordable housing. By providing these basic necessities, the government could help to alleviate the burden on the most vulnerable members of our society and create a more equitable and just society for all of us. Another pressing issue for workers in Australia is the lack of growth in wages and benefits. Despite a growing economy, many workers are struggling to make ends meet, as wages have remained stagnant for years. In fact, Australia has one of the lowest wage growth rates among developed countries, with the average annual wage growth rate hovering around 2% over the past decade. This has led to a decline in the standard of living for many workers who are finding it increasingly difficult to afford basic necessities such as housing, healthcare, and education. Furthermore, many workers are not receiving the benefits they need and deserve, such as paid sick leave, paid parental leave, and superannuation. This is especially true for workers in precarious or casual employment, who often do not have access to these benefits. The lack of benefits not only puts workers at risk of financial hardship, but it also contributes to a growing wealth gap between the rich and the poor in Australia. The lack of growth in wages and benefits is a major concern for workers in Australia. Without significant changes, workers will continue to struggle to make ends meet, and the wealth gap in the country will continue to widen. It is essential that workers come together and demand fair wages and benefits for all, and that the government takes action to address this critical issue. The current political climate in Australia fails to address the needs of the working class, leaving workers vulnerable to exploitation and mistreatment. The unions have lost much of their freedom of action, and relying on politicians and parliamentary processes has been ineffective. We suggest that workers must develop their own independent working class agenda to fight back against the forces of capitalism that prioritizes profits over people. To accomplish this, workers must break out of the cycle of hoping that the Labour Party will act in their interests. Instead, they must build a broad, independent working class movement that prioritizes the needs of the people over the exploitative capitalist economy. We argue that forming alliances with common goals is crucial to building this movement. Workers must recognize that their struggles are interconnected with those of other marginalized groups and work together to achieve their goals. By creating a united front against exploitation, workers can create lasting change and secure their rights and dignity. There is an urgent need for workers to take action and create an independent working class agenda that prioritizes their needs and values. The current political and economic system has failed them, and it is up to the workers to organize and fight for their rights. The objective is to build a broad, independent working class movement that prioritizes the needs of the people over the interests of the capitalist class. This requires breaking out of the cycle of hoping that the Labour Party or other political parties will act in the interests of the working class. Instead, workers must develop their own independent agendas and form alliances with others who share their goals. While the idea of breaking the rules and acting illegally may seem daunting, it may be necessary to achieve real change. This may involve engaging in direct action such as strikes, boycotts, and other forms of protest. Workers may also need to engage in civil disobedience, such as occupying workplaces or engaging in other forms of non-violent resistance. Ultimately, the workers must take a bold and uncompromising stance in the fight against capitalism. By breaking the rules and acting illegally if necessary, workers can challenge the exploitative nature of the capitalist economy and build a movement that prioritizes the needs of the people over the interests of the wealthy elite. The only way to counter the capitalist exploitation of workers is by developing an independent working class movement. This movement would be built on the principles of solidarity and common goals, rather than on traditional political affiliations. The labour unions have lost much of their power to fight for the rights of the working class, and politicians are more than ineffective in addressing the concerns of the working class as well. Therefore, it is essential to create a movement that is not dependent on the Labour Party or any other political entity. The movement should prioritise the needs of the people over the capitalist economy. It should aim to build a fairer and more equitable society, where workers are not exploited and their rights are protected. This movement must be broad and inclusive, welcoming workers from all sectors, races, and genders. it should form alliances with other groups fighting against inequality and injustice, such as indigenous groups and environmental activists. In conclusion, the issues faced by workers in Australia are complex and deeply rooted in the capitalist economy that prioritizes profits over people. Rising unemployment disguised as precarious work, a culture of punishing the poor, and a lack of growth in wages and benefits are just a few of the challenges that workers face today. However, the workers must take matters into their own hands and develop their own independent working class agenda, rather than relying on politicians or traditional unions. This requires breaking the rules, acting illegally if necessary, and forming alliances with shared goals to build a broad, independent working class resistance. By prioritizing the needs of the people over the exploitative capitalist economy, we can create a fairer, more just society for all. It is time for workers to take back their power and fight for their rights. Workers of the world unite.